My name's Heath Lambert, and I want to thank you for listening to week 5 of the What Happened at First Baptist podcast. This week, we have been focusing on a complicated but important topic, and that topic of how to think about and how to respond to lies that are going to get told in any leadership transition. As I remind you every week, the content of these podcasts have been recorded far in advance, with the exception of these Q&A podcasts, and we are here on Thursday. Spencer, the bonus episode dropped yesterday on Wednesday, and everybody are going to be able to hear this conversation on our Q&A tomorrow on Friday. We are recording this the week of so that you can have the opportunity to hear the episodes and respond with your questions. The person who gets your questions is the person who is joining me, Spencer Harmon, our Nocatee campus pastor. And Spencer, take it away.
Yeah, so this has been, as I've been listening to the podcasts, and as I've been receiving questions, paying attention to what people are saying, questions are asking, I think this episode is probably the most painful episode for people to listen to. I think particularly in this episode, just all these lies get spoken, and you just overview them, all the lies that happen. And what was so striking to me as I'm listening to this and questions came in around this topic, what's surprising is how those lies get traction in a community of people in a church. So here's the question some of our listeners wrote in and asked about: how does that happen? How does it happen? How can a narrative that's spoken by a small group of people spread so fast? How can it gain traction, especially when the lies are very outlandish? Some of the lies you listed were like, how could people believe that's true?
Yeah.
And how does that take control of a large group of people when it's said by a small group?
Yeah. So I think to understand the answer to that actually really important question, I think there are a couple of dynamics that are in play that we need to think about. First of all, in people's hearts and minds, their churches rightly occupy expensive and expansive real estate. I mean, our churches are a big deal to us. My goodness. At First Baptist Church in Jacksonville, Florida, historically, we have been a great, big, old thing. And people have attached a lot of interest, a lot of loyalty, a lot of everything to First Baptist. And so people have attached their identities to First Baptist. And I'm not talking about staff people and pastors. I'm talking about members who volunteered for this ministry or that ministry, or sang in the choir, or played in the orchestra, or whatever. And we just attach ourselves to it. I think if you can understand that first, it starts to make sense. Now, let me explain it by saying, so the big lie that we talked about on the podcast this week was the lie that Dr. Brunson had been forced out by some group of people in the church. And what's interesting is there was about a year between the time that Dr. Brunson left and the time that lie, it was over a lie. He left in the spring of 2018, and that lie didn't really start to get traction until the winter of 19 and the early part of 2020. So here's the thing, it was out there. People talked about it, but it was sort of this novelty. Like, did you hear that? Isn't that silly? How could that happen? So it was out there and discussed, but in corners and marginalized, and it didn't have any wind in the sails. What happened between when he left and that rumor existing but having no steam and when it really started to take off? Well, what happened is that I had announced the big changes for this transition. I had said, hey, guys, good news, we're growing. Bad news, we're not growing fast enough. I mean, we knew the rough number we knew we needed to have in terms of attendance was more than double what was currently coming to First Baptist in order to pay all the bills that needed to get paid. And so hey, maybe at this rate we double in 15 years, but that's going to be too late to pay all the bills. So I had to, in the fall of 2019, I had to announce this massive right size plan. And it freaked people out. The church approved it. To this day, most of the folks stuck with us, but it freaked everybody out. And so what happens is that, so we're talking about the logic of the lie. Where it starts and how does it take over something? It starts with disappointment. It starts with disappointment that morphs into dislike. So you've got your church, you've got your ministry, it occupies this big thing in your heart, and the leader stands up and says, we're not going to be able to do this anymore. And we don't have like all sorts of rational thoughts at that point. I think this is one of the mistakes that I made. I think I didn't rightly account for how irrational and in a totally understandable way that love of church can be and the loss of it, what it can mean. So that disappointment that, whoa, this thing that I love is going to change. And then in some people, that disappointment morphs into dislike. Because I'm disappointed, I now don't like you. And then that morphs into distrust. So because I'm disappointed, I don't like you. And because I don't like you, I don't trust you. Those things don't necessarily follow on one another. It'd be possible to be disappointed and not hold somebody personally accountable for it. It also would be possible not to like someone or to dislike someone, but to still believe they're telling the truth. But the chain of events and what you're talking about is disappointment leads to dislike, leads to distrust. And then we do this weird thing. And we start to interpret information in light of our distrust of the person and our dislike, instead of letting information determine who we like and who we distrust. Now, honestly, if you look at the culture, forget church for a minute, if you look at the culture, we're watching a culture that is drifting away from truth, that's drifting away from the Word of God. And so everybody does what's right in his own eyes. And we're a culture that is very bad at examining facts. We're a culture that's very good at determining who we like and then listening to who we like. So in the world of jurisprudence, we're recording this right now, where the news this morning is that Hunter Biden is going to get indicted by the end of this month. As we're sitting here right now, Donald Trump has already been indicted. So you got Hunter Biden, the Democrat, Donald Trump, the Republican, and there are plenty of Republicans who don't need any information about what the indictments are against Donald Trump. They just know they support Donald Trump. And there are plenty of Democrats who don't need any information about the indictment against Hunter Biden. They just know he did it, and vice versa. The Republicans know that Democrat's guilty, and the Democrats know that Republican is guilty. Well, listen, I'm not now weighing in on a political situation. I'm saying as Christians, we can't do this. That reality where we separate truth from trust is what is killing our culture, and it's going to kill our churches. So what we have to do is, if you're listening to this and this is going on in your church, you have to insist that trust flows from truth. Trust flows from information. You can't decide that you are going to distrust somebody because you dislike their plan. You can't decide that you're going to distrust somebody because you're disappointed that they shared inconvenient truths. You have got to say trust is going to depend on the truth. And if we start to separate those two things, our churches are going to get just as broken as our culture is.
That's really helpful. All right, so one listener wrote in and they asked about a rumor that I do think took on a life of its own during these years of transition. And honestly, it has to do with Reformed theology. So people are asking, was there a Reformed takeover? And that led to people leaving the church. This is something that did. As I
Yes.
think back on my time, I got here at the very beginning of 2019, and these new staff members started coming, and people were like, this is a Calvinist takeover. This is Reformed theology infiltrating the church. And this listener said, is that why people were leaving the church? Is that true?
Yeah.
I'd love to hear you talk about that.
Yeah, so I'm chuckling over here, not because it's not a serious question, and I know it's a serious question, and I take it seriously. But the reason I'm chuckling is because of something that happened to me when I heard the first cut of the episode. Okay. And you know, when I recorded these things, I had some notes. I didn't have like a closely typed out script, but I had some notes that I had made, and I was just listing off, I just, at the top of the episode on Monday, I just list off all these lies, and I didn't respond to them. I just said there was a lie about this and there was a lie about that. And when I heard the first cut of the episode, I laughed because I said I didn't use as an example the lie that there was a Calvinistic takeover. And I thought, oh my goodness, everybody who's in a bad mood about what happened here is going to listen to that and go, see, he didn't say it was a lie about Calvinism. So I was like, I'm giving
This here it is.
Here it is.
Right
okay,
here for
so
you to address
I'm glad to be able to talk about it.
It was a big one.
And so, no, it is absolutely not true that we started teaching Reformed theology. No, it is absolutely not true that there was some sort of Calvinistic takeover. In fact, one of the things that is just ironic about this, you know this, when I hired you, I keep a couple of speeches in my shirt pocket that I give to people. And a couple of those speeches are for new potential hires. And one of the things that I say to people when I'm hiring them is, we are not trying to go do some Calvinistic takeover on this church. So if you're going to come here, you can't come here thinking that this is going to be your opportunity to say everything you know about Calvinism. Like that's just not what we're doing. And so everybody that works here, everybody that I have hired is here on the condition that they will not try to do some Calvinistic takeover. I mean, is that true? I mean, I asked you those questions.
Very true. Yeah.
So that is true for everybody we talk to. There's a condition to work here that's not the case. Now, here's the thing. That's going to make a lot of folks unhappy. But the reality is, what I have said repeatedly, is that this fight is not our fight. That's just not what we are trying to do. And I mean that both ways. I mean, look, we have people in our church and who have been in our church for a very long time who are committed to Reformed theology. And we have people in our church who've been in our church for a very long time who are not into that. And what I have said is that what must be true of me and my leadership, what must be true of me and my preaching, is that when I open up the Bible, people believe that I'm going to sort of play that ball as it lies. Mm-hmm. They don't need to wonder if I'm going to give the Reformed take on this or the non-Reformed take. They don't need to wonder if I'm going to give the Calvinistic bent on this or the non-Calvinistic bent on this. They need to know that I am biblical. And so my commitment is that I will be biblical. My commitment is that I will be a Baptist. My commitment is that I will be a conservative Christian. But I am not declaring war on Calvinism. I'm not declaring war on not Calvinism. I'm just saying that is not our fight. And this was a question that came up time and again. It never came up because I brought it up. It only came up when I was addressing, and I talked about how I would have these, we still have these town hall meetings. We put microphones on the floor, and anybody who wanted could walk up to the mic and ask a question. Anybody who wanted could send in a confidential question on the email, and I would get to as many questions as I could. And for, I think, a couple of years, it was either every town hall or like almost every town hall, there was a question, okay, so are we going to be a Calvinistic church? Are we going to be a church that's committed to Reformed theology? And every time I would say, no, that's not what we're trying to do. No, that is not our fight. We're a biblical church. We're going to teach the Bible faithfully. And we want to just be honest that there are a lot of good Christians who disagree on these issues. And we want faithful Christians who love Jesus and trust the Bible to feel like they could have a home here. And we would treat this as a matter of ongoing discipleship, not a matter of our commitment as a church. And I don't know if it was the very last time it was asked, but one time towards the end, the question got asked and the whole room, like 2,000 people, just groaned. And I realized, like, everybody is so sick of hearing this question, and reasonable people are believing me when I say, no, it's not true. No, that's not what we're trying to do. No, we're just trying to teach the Bible. But there were just these people who couldn't let it go, and they were just sure that they were going to catch me in some kind of thing. I've been very consistent about this. I've said the same thing over and over again. And I would even say to church leaders, there are some changes that you have to tackle. You have to tackle principle change. If people are denying Jesus and the Bible, the faith for all once delivered to the saints, die on that hill. There are some practical changes that you have to tackle. If the church is going bankrupt, if the church is going broke, you got to fix it. If there are unethical, bad things happening on the staff, you got to fix it. Listen, this is not on the triage list. This is not like, we've got to be Calvinist or we've got to stop being Calvinist. That's not on the agenda. This can be a matter of discipleship. Good Christians disagree on this. These are things that we can talk about and study the Bible together and pray over and love one another. So no, that's not what we're trying to do. No, that's not what we've done. And that's what I've said since I first got here.
Okay. The most consistent question that came in multiple times this week to the email since the podcast released is this one. It's a very simple question, but it's been asked several times, so we have to ask it. And it's just this question: if Dr. Brunson wasn't forced out, why did he leave? What happened? What actually happened? Right? Yeah. So people are, because it's you spend so much time talking about the lie that a lot of people are just, well, then what did happen? Yeah. How did this all work, and how did this transpire, and why did Dr. Brunson leave?
Yeah, so that's a totally legitimate question. I would want to say right at the outset that I am not Dr. Brunson's spokesperson. It would not be even appropriate for me to endeavor to speak on his behalf. What I can tell you is what he said to our congregation publicly, which is that the Lord had called him away. The Lord had moved him to another ministry. I can also tell you what he said to me in a meeting with Bob Russell. Bob Russell, you've heard him many times on this podcast. He was brought in by the church to help us have the best transition possible. And in a meeting with Bob Russell, Dr. Brunson said to the both of us that the Lord had called him away. The Lord had led him to another place of ministry. When he shared that with us, he didn't specify to me when that would be or where that would be, but he knew it was the case at that point. And then he also said it on the record. There are business meeting minutes for this. In a meeting with trustees, he said that to me and some members of our trustees, that the Lord had called him away. It's worth noting, by the way, that this happens all the time. I mean, all the time. I mean, you came here from another church. The Lord called you away. I came here from another ministry. The Lord called me away. The Lord does this all the time. One of the things that John Sullivan, he talks about, he says, hey, it's not worth questioning the call of God on a man's life. This is just the way it works. This is the way it happens. So even the suggestion of what really happened just sort of indicates that there's just something in the water. Why would we think anything happened when the Lord does what he does and call people away? So I can't speak for Dr. Brunson, but what he said to our congregation, what he said to me, and what he said on the record in several meetings is that the Lord called him away.
Okay. So another portion of the story podcast this week sparked some interest with some of our listeners. So at one point, maybe one of the hardest moments that you talk about this week is you get this legal letter in the mail that's kind of a threatening legal letter. And you said, we reached out to our law firm to read this and to help us respond to this. And our listeners wrote in, and they were talking about 1 Corinthians 6, Paul forbidding like believers taking each other to court. And so the question came in of, why did you choose to respond that way legally to a legal letter if believers aren't supposed to treat believers that way?
Yeah. So great question. Couple things. First of all, when you read 1 Corinthians 6, there are really two things in the chapter. first, as it relates to this legal proceeding stuff, first is a command, and the command is that Christians are not supposed to take one another to court. We're not supposed to drag each other in front of the tribunal. That, by the way, is one of the reasons why I did not reveal who sent the letter, because I think the sending of a legally threatening letter to another Christian is sinful, and so I don't want to out that person. That's not the way I'm trying to communicate on the podcast. So you got clear teaching in the Bible that this is not what Christians are supposed to do. But then you don't just have a command, you've got a rationale. So the rationale is, why don't you do that? And the reason you don't do that is because Christians are supposed to know better about how to solve our problems than the lost world is. Mm-hmm. The apostle says, don't you know you're going to judge angels? How is it that you cannot sort out these matters? And so if you are a Christian who is engaging in trying to get another Christian dragged into court, you're not just violating the commands of Scripture, but you're also saying, I'm not competent in the way that God's word says I should be competent. So you got this command, and you got this rationale. It does not say, 1 Corinthians 6 doesn't, that you should not get legal advice. It doesn't say that you should not get legal counsel. The Bible's clear that in an abundance of counselors is much wisdom. And the reality is, some of that wisdom that you're going to need, some of that counsel that you're going to need, is legal counsel. It's not a violation of 1 Corinthians chapter 6 to get legal counsel about a legal matter. It's a violation to threaten to take somebody to court. When we got this legally threatening letter, I would want everybody to know that it is our desire that we not go to court. It is our desire that we would never send such a threatening letter like that to. We would never and have never sent a letter like that to another Christian. We actually reached out in a couple of ways to the person who sent that and tried to resolve this in other matters. They actually instructed us through their legal counsel that they wanted to hear nothing from us except through our lawyer. So there, even we were limited in how we could communicate. The only way we could communicate to them was through our own legal counsel. And when we communicated to them, we communicated on the record that it is our desire that we not handle it this way. And First Baptist Church actually volunteered at our expense to handle any sort of third-party mediation that they would desire to engage in. And we've never heard back from them. So I don't think we ought to take Christians to court. We have never tried to take Christians to court, but when we have been threatened with that, we've needed to get legal counsel, and we've had some situations where that's the only way that some people would let us communicate with them.
Okay. One part of this podcast this week that was really striking to me was this section that you had with Dr. Sullivan, where he tells you, just don't respond to the lie. Mm-hmm. And you say, Dr. Sullivan, how do we do that in a social media world? And you had this phrase where you said that there are some lies that if you don't respond to them, you're the only person not talking about it in the church. So we had several pastors write in this week and say, okay, how do I discern what lies I should respond to as a leader in the church in this day and age? They know they can't respond to everything. They also recognize they're in this social media world. We had one pastor write in, he's like, what if I'm in a room of people at the church and someone shouts out a lie at me? Mm-hmm. How do I respond? How do I decide what to engage in and what not to? What kind of discernment advice can you give?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that's a really helpful context for the question. So here's the first thing I would say. I would say that you are going to have to respond to some things. There's just some things you're going to have to respond to. So this is where I think one of the most helpful things that this podcast can do is to admit, at the intro every week, I say, hey, we're doing ministry in times painfully different than the ones known by our parents and grandparents. Well, our parents and grandparents, Dr. Sullivan's generation, the leader was the one with the microphone. And if you weren't holding the microphone, you couldn't spread this stuff out very far. And so I think that the counsel that you just don't ever talk about it, which was the counsel I always heard growing up. It's the counsel that Dr. Sullivan was his instinct was to give me that. It's not as relevant anymore because social media sees to it that everybody's got a microphone. And so I do think what we have to say is, in this day and age, there are going to be some things you have to respond to. I think my favorite recommendation is the one I thought of only after all of the trouble had settled down. And that was, if you can have like a frequent myth page on your website. I think that would be great. And you can just fill that. If you got questions, go to the website. We're not going to take time on a Sunday morning or a Sunday evening to deal with this. But I still think even then, there's going to have to be some things that you respond to. And so the question is, how do you decide? Well, I think a couple of things. I think, first of all, we need to admit that it should be rare. Just because you don't want to spend every Sunday doing this. You don't want to spend every announcement doing this. You don't want to spend every 5 minutes before the sermon. I just need to talk to you guys about this new thing. Like, we just don't want, if church communication devolves into that, then what are we even doing here? So I do think it needs to be rare. And I think that means, if it's rare, that we need to establish a fairly high bar. When am I going, or leaders in our congregation, are they going to stand in front of our congregation and correct something? So I think it needs to be rare. We need to establish a high bar. One of the things that I said this week on the podcast is, you need a team of steady hands, faithful people who are going to be your counselors and who are going to help you weigh in on this. I never responded to anything, or did not respond to anything, without that kind of counsel. So I think if you have some wise leaders, some good, faithful, godly people to help say, hey, is this there? Is this at that level where we want to speak to it? I think that is really helpful. Another thing you want to look for is, I think you want to look at things that are damaging, not offensive. So it's your blessing, the Proverbs say, to overlook an offense. Not everything that is offensive to you is equally damaging. There are times when you just need to receive that offense. You just need to say, okay, I'm going to take that. I'm going to love covers a multitude of sins, and I'm going to move on with my life. But if we're talking about things that are damaging, things that are fracturing relationships, things that are damaging the church's testimony in the community, that's starting to rise to a level where we're going to want to respond to it. And then another thing I would say you need to be really careful is, I think we want to, as much as we can at all, avoid defending ourselves. And when we correct something, we want to be defending others. So it's one thing for me as a pastor to use my energy and my time and my strength to defend you. It's another thing for me to be standing up defending myself. Nobody's going to believe that anyway, you know. So I think those are some things to think through. You know, you said this pastor writes in and says, hey, I'm getting asked a question in front of everybody. Well, if you get asked a question in front of everybody, well, then you've just got simple, straightforward, transparent honesty. You know, we put these microphones on the floor, and people would ask us, are you trying to make us a Calvinist church? And the answer is no, I'm not. That's not me being defensive. That's not me using any extra energy. It's just, I said I was going to answer your questions. You asked me a question, so now I owe you my honesty. So I think those are some things to think about. But listen, you know what? Here's the reality. Your answers might not work. I want to say in a lot of contexts, they probably won't work. And I think we got to... I think we've got to get comfortable with that. In the Bible, every person that the Lord calls to ministry, he gives a specific job. And no person called to ministry gets the same specific job as anybody else. Really candidly, one of the reasons there was such a sustained, such a dramatic decline at First Baptist Church for so many decades is because we needed to be honest that the ministry of Homer Lindsey Jr. was over. It was over. Homer Lindsey Jr.'s ministry went with him to heaven. And there's not going to be any more Homer Lindsey Jr. ministry in Jacksonville, Florida. He's in heaven. He wouldn't come back if we gave him the chance. And so what it has been my job to do is to be candid with people that's over and it's not coming back. There can be honor, there can be gratitude and appreciation and joy and memories and all those things, but the ministry's done and it's not coming back. And my candor on that led to disappointment, and it led to dislike, and it led to distrust, and it led to disinformation. And what I found out the hard way is that God is creating a new ministry here. That's just what's happening. And wherever you are, God is going to use the lies and dishonesty to form and fashion the people who are going to be a part of the ministry that the Lord has called you to. When it's over, listen, life's too short to go to a church with a pastor you hate. You should go someplace else. Life's too short to beg people to stay in a church where they hate you and think you're a liar. I think you need to be honest. I think you need to take all the care that I've talked about, but also in and through and above and around all of that, you need to trust that the Lord is doing something new, and that new thing is going to be more painful than you want it to be. But when it's over, you're going to have a lot more clarity about what your ministry is, not just about what is the ministry that you've inherited.
Okay. Well, let's end with this last question. And it's a little unique, maybe a little uncomfortable, but I think it's important. There have been several people this week, a handful of people this week, that have been upset by this episode. There are people who disagree with you about these lies. There are people who say, oh, there's another side of the story that doesn't have a podcast associated with it, or they're accusing you of telling lies by recording the podcast.
Yeah.
So you're like doing the thing that they say that you're saying other people are doing. One of the things that struck me this week as I've learned about that is that, wow, those people are listening to this podcast.
Yeah.
They're listening to they're paying close attention to what is being said. They're maybe listening to this Q&A right now. And it struck me yesterday as I was thinking about our conversation that, oh my goodness, Heath has the opportunity to talk to them and they may listen, or they just listen to whatever he says on this podcast. So talk to those people. You have their ear right now. What do you want to say to them?
Yeah. So first, let me be clear about the potential audiences for this podcast. Not everybody is going to listen to every podcast. Not everybody's going to listen to this podcast. When we talked about doing this podcast, you were part of these conversations, and I wanted to do this podcast. There was, in no particular order, for people who are interested in the history of First Baptist Church, because it's a remarkable history. Mm-hmm. And that could be people who were our members 25 years ago and they live in Montana now. That could be people who are our members today and they would not miss a service anytime the doors are open. There's all sorts, that could be denominational leaders. There's all sorts of people who are interested in the history of this church that has had a remarkable influence in evangelicalism in general and in the Southern Baptist Convention in particular. So I wanted to talk to those people. I also wanted to talk to pastors. This has been a real burden in the podcast. I think I want to say most of the people that we're hearing from across the country are from pastors who are going, oh my goodness, this is so helpful. Thank you so much. This is hopeful. This is encouraging. It's really helpful. I really wanted to talk to those folks and say, hey, listen, there are some lessons we learned as we were going through this painful transition. And if we can help you, then it will have helped to make the pain worth it. We also want to talk to church members who are going through ministry transitions. And just like, I told that story about Jimmy Scroggins coming, and when everybody heard that, like, oh, this is like a thing that happens. It's not just like only ever happened here. It happens at other places too. It was encouraging. And so I want other church members to hear that, listen, if you're going through this at your church, it's not some unique, strange anomaly. I also knew that there would be people who dislike me, who don't like the church, who have real questions and accusations about my integrity, who would listen to it. One of the things that we we thought about when we were counting the cost on the podcast is maybe we won't do it. Maybe we won't do it because people will be upset, and we don't want to inflame anything. We don't want to poke anybody in the eye. And what we decided is, if you spend your life doing that, if you spend your life saying, well, I got some things to say, but it'll be offensive to people. Well, if you live your life like that, you won't even preach the gospel. You'll never say anything that matters if you avoid things that might offend somebody. So the first thing I would say to those who don't like me, who have real questions about my integrity, the first thing I would say is that I know that you are listening, and I'm even glad that you're listening, but it was not the intended audience. The intended audience are people who are going to listen and be helped. Honestly, if you're listening to this and it's hurting your feelings, if it's frustrating you, if it's making you angry, I would probably say don't listen to it. I mean, honestly, again, life's too short to listen to podcasts that upset you and make you angry. So maybe for people who have moved on, they left our church, they didn't want to be here anymore, they didn't want to listen to me talk all the time. Maybe it's a really good idea to just truly move on and just say, hey, I shook the dust off my feet at that place, and now I just need to stay busy doing what I'm doing. I think that might be some good advice, but I understand that people don't necessarily want to hear what my opinion of good advice might be. The thing that I would say in addition to that is I'm really honest that there's another side to the story. I am very candid that, in fact, on Monday's episode, the first thing I did was just list a bunch of lies, and there was really no response to it. It's just, here's the lie, here's that lie, here's that lie. So still, I'm even just giving vent to some of the things that people who are upset have said. I am not trying to persuade you. If you think I'm a liar, if you disagree with what happened here, I am not trying to persuade. It's not my job to do that. It's not my goal to do that. What I'm trying to do is help these pastors that I talked about. I'm trying to help these interested people that I talked about. I'm trying to help these church members. And if you listen to this and you're frustrated, then I hope you can find something else that helps you. But there's just never going to be anything I'm going to say that will help you. And I understand that. And so I think where we are is at an impasse. It has taken me about 5 years to get comfortable with that reality. I'm going to talk about that a little bit more next week, but it's taken me 5 years to get comfortable with that reality that we're just at an impasse. And at a certain point where I think we are is that what I want to do is admit to you that I know you disagree. I want you to hear me say that I love you, and I want you to hear me say that I pray for you. And I hope you would do the same for me. I hope you would extend the same courtesy to me. Hey, Heath, we disagree, but that doesn't mean I don't love you, and that doesn't mean I don't pray for you. If we can admit there's a disagreement, but love each other and pray for one another, then it'll be okay. And then I think what I would do is turn the question a little bit and say to those who are listening that don't have that stake in it, that don't hear it and get frustrated, I would say actually the existence of the question is proof positive that what I was talking about on this week's episode is real. It is real. At some point I said, there are going to be people who decide they don't trust you and they will never believe you ever again. Never a word you say. And even the existence of this question demonstrates that that is true. And so what are you going to do with that? What are you going to do with that? I have had to get comfortable with it because I don't like it, because I want to be friends. I wish we could make up. I wish we could move on together. But that has not been possible. And so for you that are listening, you're a pastor of a church, you're a member of a church, I would say, listen, that the very existence of the question is why you need to do whatever it depends on you to live at peace with all men. what we got to do is live it. We're not all going to agree on transition plans. We're not all going to agree on the stories that people have to tell about what happened. We're going to have to move along, and we're going to have to live at peace with one another. You should do everything you can to be forgiven and to bury bitterness, and to do your very best to move along. But at the end of the day, in every ministry that matters, there is going to be controversy. Doesn't that stink?
Yes.
I mean, it stinks because we didn't get into ministry to be controversial. We got into ministry to be helpful. But don't think that because there's controversy, that means it's bad. The New Testament talks about the work of Jesus Christ like it's a scandal. Talks about the death of Jesus like it's a scandal. It is a scandal attached to the cross. But in this horribly scandalous thing, God redeems the world. So I'll be honest, you know me, and we talk about these things all the time. It hurts my feelings that people are listening to this and I'm making them angry instead of encouraging them. But I've had 5 years to get used to it. I've had 5 years to really check what I believe about the Lord, that the Lord knows how to use even the bad things for good. If you're listening to this and you don't like me, listen, do you know the devil executed Jesus, but God turned it for good? And so even if you think I'm the devil, you could have some solace that the Lord is going to take even these horrible things that I do for good. And if you're a pastor who hates as much as I do being disliked, the Lord is going to take that dislike, that pain, that agony, and he's going to turn it for good. Jesus Christ promises to build his church, even in the midst of the gates of hell. He is going to do it. If God can take the death of Jesus, that scandal, and turn it to everlasting good, he's going to take our pain and our disagreements and turn it for good as well, and it will all be wonderful in the end.
Amen. I think that's a good place to end week 5 of what happened at First Baptist. Just a reminder, please send in your questions to us as you listen to the podcasts. Email whathappened@fbcjax.com. I'm getting your questions. I'm reading all of them as they come in. I'm synthesizing them and putting them together to cover as many of them as we can during these podcasts. We have just a few weeks left in the What Happened at First Baptist podcast. And so until then, we will see you on Monday.